there are these extraordinary reductions, potential reductions in revenues for legal services. And the question is what the impact of those cuts will have on the programs, and then what pro bono can do to mitigate the impact of those cuts. We've always seen a justice gap, a gap between the legal needs of low-income and disadvantaged people and the resources available, particularly the publicly funded resources available to meet those needs. But what we're seeing now, even before these proposed cuts, is that the budget gap has become a chasm. The demand for legal services is at an all-time high, both because of the increase in the number of low-income people in the U.S., which is at its highest level ever, but also because the number of problems faced by low-income people has increased due to the economic downturn and just the greater complexity of our society. So if anything, this is a time, of course, when we need additional funding for legal services, and the proposal is to cut very deeply, to cut $70 million out of a $410 million budget for legal services. We certainly plan to do our very best in working with major law firms and corporate legal departments if that terrible possibility should come to pass, to try to address the downturn, the impact of the downturn in funding. But my concern is that pro bono will not be able, not only to fully meet the gap, but that pro bono itself may not be able to do as much as we'd previously done before. The reason for that is that the vibrancy and effectiveness of pro bono work is very much dependent on having a core of full-time legal services experts who have a community presence, offices in the neighborhood, and are able to screen cases, locate clients, identify issues, and mentor and train volunteers who are working in areas very much out of their typical practice area. With the proposed cuts, and even now, before them, what we're seeing is that the legal services infrastructure has been greatly compromised, and that if that continues and worsens, what we will see, I'm afraid, is that pro bono will lessen because people simply won't have the ability to access opportunities. They will be concerned about taking matters if they feel they can't get training or materials to help them do it well. Looking at the impact of $70 million, which obviously is an enormous amount of money and is an 18% cut for the legal services programs, it's very clear that that obviously would require a significant reduction in the work of the Legal Services Corporation grantees and their attorneys and legal staff. But because these programs operate so leanly, the impact of the cut is even greater than you might imagine. So literally hundreds of thousands of low-income people who otherwise could have gotten help, desperately needed help to address critical legal issues, will not be able to get that help. Offices, a number of offices will close, particularly offices in rural and hard-to-reach areas where the legal services program is the only access to legal services option for people, and almost 400 staff attorneys will have to be let go. I think it is fair to say that for some clients, the impact of those cuts will literally be a matter of life and death. For people who are being abused and who will not be able to get an advocate to come in and help them receive a protective order against their abuser, for people who may be evicted in bad weather conditions, for children who desperately need insurance coverage but have been denied it. The difference between having a lawyer and not having a lawyer really can be a life or death difference. And so what we're going to see is not only fewer clients being helped, but some very profound and troubling human tragedies that should never have occurred. We'll also see more crowded and inefficient courts, so we'll be placing a burden on our court system. I think we're probably going to see an uptick in the criminal justice system, because when people don't have access to to the courts and feel that they're getting their say and that they're being fairly treated, the result often is that they will engage in further violence because they simply don't see any other solution. So what we're seeing is the initial impact on hundreds of thousands of people, but ultimately a much greater and more destructive impact on society as a whole. We're hopeful that the public and Congress will recognize that even in times when budget cutting is viewed as essential, that this is an area where cutting funding is really penny-wise, pound-foolish. Not only because legal services is a very inexpensive program, but it leverages other funding and leverages millions and millions of hours of pro bono service, and to the extent that its capacity is reduced, it will lose that ability to leverage. Our hope is that if the funding is restored, that one of the things that we will do is to work with law firms, in-house legal departments, and legal services offices to figure out how to make this program even more efficient, even more effective, and help it to reach even more clients so that every dollar of federal funding will go even further. We do have some exciting ideas, some innovative projects, some new ways of integrating legal services programs with pro bono assistance that we think offer great promise in the future for narrowing the justice gap. But again, we can only do that if we start with at least reasonable funding for legal services so that those organizations can be the conduit, the expert, the guide, the community leader that the pro bono volunteers need in order to do their work.